everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have Dr. Bill Lawrence. And Dr. Lawrence actually has a degree in law. However, he has a Master of Science in Psychology and a Ph.D. in nutrition. And since 1990, his focus has been on slowing and reversing human biological aging. He has developed numerous science-based protocols focused on optimal aging for health professionals and individual clients. And currently, Dr. Lawrence is the administrator of 2 clinical studies to determine if human biological age can be reversed. Welcome, Dr. Lawrence. I am so excited to have you today.
Well, thank you, Sandy. It's great to be here. Actually, it's just great to be anywhere.
Well, yeah, exactly. These days, that's just the case. But I'm really excited to talk to you because what you're doing is truly, in my opinion, cutting edge. And it's based in science. So it's not just techniques that people can use and maybe it's going to help them age well, maybe not. This is truly science that you're doing. And you have these 2 clinical studies that I really want to introduce to my listeners because I feel like it's really going to be of interest to many people in midlife. So, maybe I guess we can, because you're actually doing quite a few things yourself, aren't you?
Oh, yes. Let me give your
Yeah,
audience some background. And,
sure.
all of us have our personal stories as to why we're in the health field and so forth. And I have one of those. When I said I'm glad to be anywhere, literally, I truly mean that. I was raised in the Mormon church, and we do a lot of genealogy work there. I knew growing up that we did not have genes for longevity, certainly among the males in my family.
Okay.
And my uncles, grandfather, uncles, and so forth, they all died in their 50s, all of them from heart disease. My father had his first heart attack or myocardial infarction at 57, and then his fatal one at 65. Looking back through the genealogy, there was only one man, one male, over a period of 200 years where we had both birth and death information. Only one male made it to 70 in all those years. He was a wonderful man. He was an uncle of mine. He was a non-denominational preacher, just the most ethical, honest, good human being. And it was interesting because he preached all the time, and he would refer oftentimes to a section of Psalms in the Bible where it says that mankind should live for 70 years. Well, that's 70 years. Of interest, in his 70th year, about 3 months after he turned 70, he was diagnosed with cancer and died 3 months later.
Wow.
So there are 2 lessons, I think, to be learned there, Sandy. One is we really do have to be careful about what we put in our brains. The second lesson is if he had called his nephew, me, UCLA-Law graduate, I'd have said, well, let me do a little research in this Bible. And lo and behold, there's a different section of the Bible that says basically, if you live a good life and you're a good person, you can get an extra 10-year bonus. And if he had asked me, I'd have said, well, yeah, but anyway. So that's why I do what I do is I'm going to be 75 here in 2 months. And when my father died, 1988, at that point I was still practicing law, but I had gone into an entrepreneurial world. I was building medical buildings and shopping centers and radio stations. And I think I had at one time 17 commercial stores all over the West Coast and so forth. And the reason for that is I get bored with, once I learn how to do something, then I get really bored with it. And so I go on, do other things. And so that's why the masters in psychology and various other things. And so when my father died, I thought my priorities are not really where they should be. Why should I work to earn another million or 5 million or whatever?
Right.
When I have a lifespan, maybe at that point, I was in my late 40s, maybe I have 20 years left. And I thought, this is not the way my life is going to go. I'm going to be the exception. So that's when I went back to school and got the Ph.D. and so forth. And so for 30 plus years, I've been working as a researcher, initially, now a scientist in the field of longevity, looking for the interventions that would allow me to wake up tomorrow morning. Because
Right.
I'm in, you could say I'm sort of in overtime, coming up on 75.
That's amazing. But you know what? I might have to say, and we're going to see this because I have to note here that we are going to post this on my YouTube channel. I'll be launching my YouTube channel with your video, Dr. Lawrence. So there you go.
Hmm.
And you'll all be able to see this video. And you certainly, most certainly don't look close to your age. So you're doing something right.
Well, I've been doing a lot of things for a long time. It's interesting. As I said earlier, I get bored with things. I don't ever get bored with avoiding death.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 30 years, and I have to force myself to go to bed at night. I could do this 7 days a week. If I didn't have the balance of a wonderful woman in my life, I would probably be doing this 7 days a week. So on Fridays, I set the work aside and I'm with my wonderful lady, and we're ballroom dancers. And so we have that balanced social life. And then on Monday morning, I'm back here doing 15 hours a day.
That's amazing though
So
that you're able to do that and you have somebody to help encourage that, because we all know we need a break. Because I feel sometimes I'm a little bit the same. When I'm very passionate about something, I just want to go and I go full force. And I have my husband who's telling me, hey honey, why don't you just take it easy this week? It's okay, you don't have to push so hard. So I feel you
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Okay. Um,
So let's get into, you have now two current studies, clinical studies that you have participants involved in, and they've been going on for a while, right? So one is on telomeres
mhm,
and one
yes.
is on methylation. And today we are going to talk about one of those studies, and one of them is on telomeres. And you pronounce it telomeres, correct?
Yes. It's sort of a tomato kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, I've heard it both ways.
Yeah.
But, I think it would be really useful to our listeners to describe first what telomeres are and how they actually can be a strong indicator on how we're aging.
Yes. Um, Let me, if I might, let me just quickly do a little bit of background about
Yeah,
the institution that I'm affiliated with, and then I want to get down into actually into the telomeres.
perfect.
Um, but I'll give you sort of a sneak preview on our chromosomes. In every cell, we have these little end caps called telomeres. And what they do is, if sometimes people will talk about the, what do you call them in English? The aglets on the end of our shoelaces, on like sport shoes. You have that little plastic end cap, and it allows you to take the lace and lace up your shoe.
Yes.
Over a period of time, if that aglet or plastic cap, if it begins to wear and deteriorate, then all of us have experienced where it's difficult to get the laces, through the little holes and so forth. Well, in a sense, a very, very simplistic way, that's what telomeres are. They are the end of our chromosomes, and they keep the chromosome integrity, such that as the cells replicate, it's important that the chromosomes be able to divide. And the telomeres are the end caps that allow that to happen, okay? And cell replication is what drives life. If we don't have cell replication, we don't have regeneration of organs and so forth. And we only get a certain amount of cell replication during a lifetime. Without getting into too deep into the science, basically we get about 50 to 60 cell replications, you could say, over a lifetime. And each time a cell replicates, just like with your the sports shoe, each time a cell replicates, you lose just a fraction, a little tiny bit of the end cap. And so as we age, particularly when we get up into our 60s and 70s, we find that the erosion of that end cap is associated with vulnerability to all forms of disease. The immune system becomes much more vulnerable. And so if you can do something to slow down the erosion or that loss of that telomeres, you're going to be healthier because the cell replication is taking place 100%, functionally, okay? So that's an overview. Let me quickly go through some background so people have some understanding that what we're doing, the larger picture, and then I'll get into telomeres, if that's okay.
Perfect. Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. Let's see, I'm going to switch to, let's see here. Okay. Okay, as you said, Sandy, we have two clinical trials. The telomere study started about, well, the basic research and so forth. Well, the research started 40 years ago, but the basic foundations of the study were laid about 5-6 years ago, and I'll explain that in a moment. And it's been going on 4 years. We have about 100 participants. We've restricted admission to the telomere study and the DNA methylation study to basically physicians and health professionals. The clinical studies are co-sponsored by an institute in St. Petersburg, Russia, and there's a reason for this that'll come out in a few moments. I have been affiliated with them for 5 years now. I'm an American with an American passport, but my family is from Russia. My father's name is Ivan. I have 2 brothers named Ivan. That's as good as a Russian passport.
You know what? I actually have a niece who's dancing with Bolshoi, so I guess I'm
Oh
somehow
my
affiliated
goodness.
too.
Oh, as a ballroom dancer, I understand what that means. I
I'm
mean,
sure
that's
you do.
oh yeah,
It's
that's
pretty amazing. So I
yeah.
have, and I'm Croatian background, so I
Ah,
got some Eastern European
sure,
lines in there too.
sure. So this is the institute in St. Petersburg, and until COVID, I was bouncing back and forth between the States and
Yeah,
St. Petersburg, which, by the way, apart from this presentation, is a lovely city. It's like Paris 100 years ago. It's just people should put it on their list of places.
I
Very,
agree.
so,
I
yeah,
agree, Bill. And I actually want to go maybe
yeah.
next year because I've seen photos and you don't see them that often. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, and the Russians are friendly people. The media in both countries distort, I think, the situation. The Russians are good people, just like Americans. They just want to live their life. They want to raise a family, have a job, and so forth.
Yes,
Same as Americans and so
I
forth.
agree.
Yeah. This is Professor Cavinson, the director of the institute, and the history here quickly is. That the Institute is part of the Pavlov Institute of Physiology, comparable to probably certainly Harvard, Stanford, et cetera, in Russia. The Institute has been around since 1788. Yeah, long time, so forth.
Wow.
Yeah. Cavinson, I won't go through all the detail, but Cavinson, is well known in Europe. He's been the president of everything basically in Europe for a lot of years. He's unknown here in America, but in pretty much all throughout Europe and the Middle East, he's extremely well known. The studies that we're going to talk about before the telomere clinical study have been conducted at these various institutions. The Kurov Military Medical Academy, which would be somewhat similar to West Point and so forth, but it's a military academy and so forth. Uh, the background studies for telomeres and DNA methylation, apart from the current ones, have been done in conjunction with the National Institute of Aging here in the USA, Italian facilities, Germany, Spain, and so forth, Belgium, France, and others. So it isn't that the Russians are secretly over there doing this science and so forth. They jointly do the clinical studies that have been going on since really 1970
Yes.
with a bunch of institutions. And I'll give some background here. This is Professor Kavinson receiving Russia's highest civilian award. And Professor Kavinson is my direct boss. He's receiving the award for his 40 to 50 years of service to the Russian people, first in the military, and that's his boss standing next to him. And I can't say that I've ever seen his boss in the clinic, but I see his physician there on a regular basis carting out peptides and so forth.
Ah,
And
yes, of
yeah,
course.
yeah, and President Putin has a real interest in being healthy, as we all know.
That's amazing.
Um, so what Kavinson is saying here is that peptides are going to be the far surpass drugs as a pharmaceutical intervention. And I'll explain a little bit more. And he's saying 10 to 15 years. He said this 2 years ago. It's actually happening now. And part of the reason for that is that the peptides that the Russians have developed, unlike drugs, have no adverse qualities, no adverse events and so forth, because the ones that we use in the studies I'll show you are derived from animals, and
Right.
we'll go through that in a moment. And if they weren't safe, I can guarantee you, let's see here. I can guarantee you that Professor Kavinson and I would probably be doing a bit of coal mining in Siberia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Putin is not a very tolerant of failure. So
No, 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 for sure
no,
not.
yeah. Unlike America, that has these golden parachutes for CEOs who destroy their companies and then
Oh,
they get
gosh.
paid millions. It's a different system. Anyway,
Yeah.
so this is the accepted paradigm all over the world in medical science and basically, in people's minds. This is how people age. Okay, well, we're determined to change that, and that's what these studies are showing.
And really, I'm just going to stop there for a
Hmm.
second. The
Sure.
photo that Dr. Lawrence has just shown is really the progression of age, how we physically look. And it's commonly known that, our skin sags are, I would never peg you, by the way, as turning 75.
Mhm.
But yes, it is what's accepted right now.
Yes, we're changing that.
Yes.
So there's lots of theories of aging, more than shown on this chart here. There's what about 6 or 7 on this chart. There's probably another dozen or so major theories of aging. And years ago, and I'll explain how I sort of got to Russia, but years ago, I thought I need to, in my research, figure out where is the intervention that has what I call the greatest leverage. In other words, what can one do about the aging process that has the highest payoff? And of course, diet comes immediately to mind, because diet is basically a foundational for both health and longevity.
Yes.
But I was already practicing a clean diet for probably the last 40 years because I knew my family history and my father's death. So what I decided was that telomere shortening, DNA damage, as we call it, or DNA methylation damage, and organ regeneration were probably the most powerful interventions. And so that became my focus. And probably 7, 8 years ago, what happened with Google Translator was I started seeing clinical studies published in China and Russia and other countries. And since I had decided that telomere science, DNA damage, and organ regeneration were the 3 that I was interested in, when I started seeing Russians talking about telomeres and the fact that they had figured out and I'll explain this a little bit later. They had figured out how to slow down that loss of telomeres that we were talking about before,
Yes.
the end cap, okay? And they indeed had actually figured out how to reverse, in other words, regrow telomeres on those chromosomes, which is unprecedented even today. So the three that I focus on is telomere shortening, DNA damage, and organ regeneration.
Perfect.
So quick definition, we'll sail through this. I don't want to get too complex. Peptides, everyone is familiar with proteins, okay? We eat food and, it's processed in our bodies through the digestive system into protein. Protein supports basically pretty much all of life, along with hydration, water, and so forth. Well, peptides are simply very small proteins. That's all they are. They're
Mhm.
derived from food, from plants, from animals, and so forth. And the science world has just sort of decided, basically to classify proteins in two categories. If they have a lot of amino acids, and I'll explain this in a moment. Well, I'll explain it now. Amino acids are derived, they're basically molecules that come out of plants and come out of animals, okay? And if you have a chain of these amino acids, and if you connect these amino acids in this picture, you can kind of see Cavinson in the background there. Those are chains of amino acids, okay, in that picture. So if you hook these chains together, and if you keep, like a Lego set, if you keep hooking them together and you get to 50, the 51st one is called a protein, okay? The,
Right.
the ones from 1 to 50 are peptides. So they're just very small little nano proteins, but they're called peptides. And they have advantages over proteins in that they can survive the digestive system pretty much intact, unlike proteins that degrade to a certain degree. They can go through cell membranes, and so they can get through these cell membranes and get to the nucleus of cells. They can even pass through the brain membrane, the blood-brain membrane. So they're very handy little devices, you might say.
I would just love to intervene because
Mm-hmm,
typically people who have symptoms, health issues, they have trouble digesting proteins and
mm-hmm.
breaking them down and assimilating. So this would bypass individuals who have digestive issues with proteins, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, what the Russians discovered, Cavinson and so forth, and I'll explain where his role is they discovered that the human that what we call the specific limit, the average human lifespan can exceed the 75 to 80. Now, the reason that it's 75 to 80 is that we're talking about Russians, Ukrainians, and so forth, and they typically have a shorter lifespan than we do in the US for a variety of reasons. Anyway, the Russians figured out that there's a sort of a reserve of another 35 or 40 years that they can use, or they can create that reserve or access that reserve. So we'll see that in a moment. So this is, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sandy.
No, I'm
Okay,
go ahead. I was just
okay.
saying that.
So
Yeah.
this is Ivan Pavlov. People know Dr. Pavlov primarily for his classical conditioning with the dogs and so forth,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
he was so much more than that. He is known in Russia for his work for 60 some odd years in the physiology of digestion, human digestion. The classical conditioning was just sort of an offshoot, but oftentimes a scientist becomes known for something that the public can quickly embrace and understand, where the real work is something else. So with Dr. Pavlov, he received the first time a Russian received the Nobel Prize in medicine in 1904, as I recall, for his work in physiology and basically digestion. And he was actually the one that began to understand that if you have very small proteins, that they pass through the digestive process fairly intact. And he didn't call them peptides, there's a different Russian word for it. But he's really, in a sense, the father of peptides. And that was 120 years ago. Now, peptides are a hot item here in the US, I think the last 10 or 15 years. You see them in all sorts of things, particularly cosmetics and so forth.
Yes, yes.
Um, I'm
Collagen, yeah.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
I won't be surprised to pull up to a gas station one of these days and see there's a gas station pump there that has peptides in it. Because what you can do literally is, if peptides come out of plants, animals. So what you could do is take, just like they do I think it's called ethanol here in the United States, from corn, that they create gasoline, petrol with. Well, you could throw a couple of peptides out of corn in it and then put a label on it. This is gasoline with peptides. So
Could you imagine?
yeah, who knows?
You
Okay.
never know.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Professor Cavinson. He was in the military, and what happened was he was a young medical doctor with a bunch of other scientists. And we're not going to go through these peptides. I've already talked about how they link together to create finally a protein. This is the process of how they pass through the DNA and the RNA and become functional. This one is interesting. It shows a pancreas peptide in the middle there and how it binds to the DNA. And we won't get into the science of it at this point because we don't have time. Okay. Different classes of peptides. Actually, it's interesting. The Russian COVID vaccine is built out of peptides.
Really? Okay, that is
Yeah.
unbelievable. I've heard that they have a fabulous vaccine.
Yeah, they do. And the nice thing about it is it's safe because
Yes.
it's built out of peptides.
Is it synthetic?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
They call it Sputnik.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
heard of this.
Okay, so history here, real quick. Back in the 60s, 70s, the Russian military, particularly the submarine portion of the military, were experiencing, they would send out young sailors, in their 20s, and the officers would be in their 30s, send them out on these 3, 4, 5-month missions or cruises or whatever they call them, in these fairly crude submarines that were built, most of them probably in the 60s. They had crude nuclear reactors in them, shielded very minimally with lead and so forth. And what was happening is when these young men would come back from an assignment, they were having all sorts of medical issues, particularly thymus damage, immune system deterioration, because of both the length of time they were out and also the nuclear exposure. So the Russian military, I shouldn't say that, the Soviet Union military, excuse me, knew that they had to do something about this. They also were aware that the cosmonaut program was underway, and they were concerned about cosmonauts coming back. Cosmonauts are what we call astronauts. The
Okay.
cosmonaut program would have also similar problems. And the Soviet Union was also aware that the Americans, as were the Soviet Union, was building weapons, battlefield weapons that could be used like lasers to blind troops to destroy their hearing and so forth. And so they basically went to these medical doctors and scientists who were in the Soviet Union military and said, you need to figure out how to protect, and you need to figure out how to regenerate. Initially, it was the thymus immune system and so forth. And so Cavinson was in that group of scientists. They began working based on the work of Dr. Pavlov. And very few scientific discoveries are just basically, spontaneously attained. You basically build on the prior work of other scientists.
Mhm.
And there are very few exceptions. Maybe Einstein might be an exception to that. But what Cavinson did and the other scientists is they went back to Pavlov's work and they looked into his work and so forth, and they discovered that they could take these small peptides, animal sourced, in this case they come from calves, and if they put them into a human being, into basically the thymus from a calf into a human being, that peptide would pass intact through the digestive system, through the blood system, through the liver, and it would go to the thymus. And they would find that they could regenerate damaged immune systems, at least the thymus aspect of it. And so they started using for the submarine people with really good results. Then they spread it to the rest of the military and so forth. They used it in the cosmonaut program. This is analysis of application of peptide cosmonauts after long-term space flight. So they were using peptides way back in the early space program as well. Basically, what they would do is use the peptides to regenerate both the thymus and then it later become the pineal gland for these cosmonauts after they came back from space.
Wow.
Oh, I put this in. This PowerPoint that I'm using is one I just used 2 weeks ago at a medical conference in Dallas. Actually, I think it's the first large medical conference post-COVID where it was a live event. It was so wonderful to see 200 doctors, none of them having masks on, being able to sit in a room together. Just amazing. Anyway, this is Miska. Little Miska, the Americans and the Soviet Union used animals initially in their space exploration programs and so forth. So this is little Miska, and I just had to put this in because I love, if you can see her little space hat there, space helmet. Isn't that cute?
Yeah, very cute. Very
Yeah,
cute.
yeah, very cute. So it has nothing to do with peptides. Yeah,
What a cute dog.
Yeah, Miska is not on peptides.
Okay.
Okay, so they use the peptides also with the Russian gymnastic teams and other Russian Olympic teams and so forth, because what they discovered was, as you would expect with Olympic athletes and so forth, that they do a tremendous amount of damage to their body, particularly bones, muscles, ligaments, tendons, and so forth. And so they started using peptides to rehabilitate, and this is the Olympic gold medal for gymnastics. That's Kavinson in the middle there.
And I'm going to actually say, like, these gymnasts were able to use this because they're just technically like food supplements.
Yes, they are. They are.
They're not performance enhancing drugs or anything in that respect, but they help to regenerate from that oxidative damage.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. We bring them in from St. Petersburg, and the customs lets them come through because they're food supplements. They're considered food supplements in Russia.
Right.
So what caught my eye early on was I mentioned that there were three things I was interested in: telomeres, DNA methylation, which we'll cover at another time, and regeneration of human organs. People don't realize that, but we've identified about 78 human organs. People can, they think about the liver and the kidney and pancreas, but there's 78 systems and organs in a human being. So with this study in 2003 or 2002, I saw this with the Google Translator, where the Russians were able to take two peptides, the pineal gland peptide and the thymus peptide, and use them to radically, very significantly reduce all-cause mortality. And that's what this published study, the abstract, shows. I'm going to actually show you now a summary. So what the Russians had in this clinical study, it was basically a 12-year study for the people in the group of 60 years to 74. They called them elderly people. The Russians are not the most diplomatic people. But in that category, what they did was they had, if you see in the middle where it says control, let me see if I can use my little laser here.
That means I'm like 9 years away from elderly, Bill.
Well, only in Russia. You're securely in middle age here in America.
Thank you very much.
So if you look at the control here, okay, this is the people not using peptides, okay, and we'll skip the 8 years because the study continued on for 12 years. So over the course of 12 years, just using what they call polyvitamins, now not peptides, just vitamins and normal diet and so forth. 44% of these people died, and that would be about the norm in the U.S. This is higher than in the U.S. because again the Russia and the Ukraine people just aren't as healthy, although the U.S. is unfortunately catching up to them.
I know, right?
So this is the control group. 44% of these people died using just one peptide. And by the way, we have 21 of these natural peptides now in my call it my medical bag or my research bag, but using just one, the pineal gland peptide, the mortality rate was 22%. In other words, it dropped in half over a period of 12 years by using one peptide.
Wow.
That really, that's what I said was wow when I read this the first time. Then if we go to the older group, of which I am on the cusp of.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. But I'm, I'm happy to be, I'm happy to wake up breathing. I don't,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. And I am healthy. I mean,
And
I
you
truly,
look healthy and you feel
yeah,
healthy,
yeah,
right?
I truly do. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can ballroom dance. Vess is a competitor, international competitor in ballroom, and those days are behind me. But I can dance 3 hours flat out, and we're not talking about the social dancing people. If you think of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, that kind of dancing for 3 hours, and we do it 3 nights a week.
That's so amazing. That's why you look so fit.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's go down here to the old people. Again, they're not very diplomatic. Okay, so I'm in this category, 75 to 89. Now, the study had to be shorter. It was a 6-year study because obviously because of the age. So in that 6-year period of time, again, the control group, the polyvitamin non-peptide group, basically 81.8% of these people died. Again, fairly normal for that age bracket over that period of time. Taking just one peptide, the pineal gland peptide, it dropped the mortality rate to 45.8, or basically 46%. So from 80, almost 82%, it dropped it to 46%.
Wow.
They had added for this group a second peptide, the thymus peptide. When they had both of them being used, it dropped it further down to 33.3%. So the mortality or death rate, you might say, went from 82% over that 6 years to 33% because of just 2 peptides. And this is based on what we call organ regeneration. The peptides go in a way, it'd be like taking your prized automobile into a master mechanic and saying, you fix everything that needs to be fixed on this vehicle. If it's worn even just a little bit, fix it. And that's sort of what these peptides do.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's what I thought, when I first ran into this, probably, I don't know, 7, 8 years or so ago. This is just a bar chart comparing, those studies. So we've talked about mortality. Let's talk about morbidity, in other words, illness. Okay. So they ran large clinical studies to use the peptides to see if they could decrease illness, basically, sick in a commercial environment. So Gazprom is a huge, huge oil and gas operation in Russia and Eastern Europe and so forth. And so what they did was they used 6 peptides here over a period of a year. The 6 peptides, the immune system, the brain, blood vessels, the respiratory, liver, cartilage, they use those 6. There were 11,000 some odd people in the main group that was using the peptides. And in the control group, there were 3,000 employees who were just, again, using what they call multivitamins, in other words, the non-peptide group.
Okay, so this is a pretty large study.
Yeah, 14,000 people. Yeah, that's a big study.
Yeah.
And they have, the Russians have several of these big studies like this. So here's the results. What we see over here on the left, okay, is the control group, okay? And it doesn't show the actual statistics, but it shows you sort of the magnitude of sickness is what this is. With the, for acute respiratory disease, the period of time, the observation period is 1 year, by the way. So
only in 1 year?
Yeah, well, they tracked it for 1 year. In other words, what they went into Gazprom, and they basically said to Gazprom, look, we want to create a clinical study where we have some of your people, a larger number of your people, using some peptides, those 6 peptides, okay?
Right.
And then the control group is the 3,000 that didn't use anything.
Right.
We want to see during the course of a year, basically, how many people got sick in the control group, how many people got sick in the peptide group.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what they found was that in acute respiratory diseases, that there was a decrease of 2.7 times the amount of sickness, well, in this case, acute respiratory disease. In total morbidity or total sickness, because these are people that if they're sick, they're not working. Okay, so Gazprom was very interested in this. In
Yes.
total morbidity, illness of all kinds, the peptide group had 2.3 times less morbidity than did the control group. I mean, huge decrease in sickness, basically.
Huge.
Yep.
And over a short period of time, like meaning like the bioregulators obviously begin working relatively quickly if it's over just 1 year. It's not like you have to wait 5 years before you see some results, correct?
That is correct. In fact, I'm going to show you towards the end something that really dramatizes that, reinforces that. Okay, so I put this in here, no pun intended, but if you can see changes in vision, retinal functions, and so forth using these peptides, it's pretty dramatic. So what we have is, here's diabetic retinopathy. The scan on the left, or on my left, where you see all these multicolors, you see some green. Green means you've got vision there, okay? The yellow means, impaired vision. The red and the black, basically, when you get to black, there is no vision. The red is very limited vision. So this is a person that came into the clinic there at St. Petersburg. The Institute has the research part of it. There's outside of St. Petersburg, the manufacturing, where they actually developed the peptides from the 12-month-old calves. And then they have a medical clinic where they serve Russian people as well as some foreign dignitaries and so forth. So this is a person that had diagnosed as diabetic retinopathy. On the left, they've got some severe vision issues. On the right, after a peptide program, and I can't tell you exactly how long, but I'm thinking it was probably 2 or 3 years, as I recall. On the right, you see a lot of green and very little of the black and the yellow and the red. So the person here on the right after treatment basically, I think, has a life. The
Wow,
person
that's
over
interesting.
here on the left kind of has an impaired life, at least an impaired life.
Yes.
Okay, retinitis pigmentosa. And by the way, all of these retinal diseases in the US are untreatable. The ophthalmologists and so forth in the US have some eye drops. That's it. And the eye drops maybe slow the progression a little bit. And I know this because one of my legal clients, then clinical study clients, is an ophthalmologist, and we've talked about it a lot. So this is retinitis pigmentosa. With retinitis pigmentosa, what happens is that you lose the peripheral vision first. So this person on the left, you see the black, basically a vast majority, probably 80% of what we see is black over here. And and then you see a little bit of the yellow and the green on the outside. So this is a person that is going to go blind, basically. Okay.
Yeah.
So over on the right-hand side, you see a significant increase in the green and a reduction in the black. Again, this person, I don't know exactly, what their situation would be, but I think, looking at this, that they basically can have, some degree of a normal life. I don't know if they can drive a car with that, but they are certainly better off than before treatment.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, this is macular degeneration. Again, it's basically treatable here in the US, except with a few drops. And then it's interesting, the pharmaceutical industry couldn't come up with anything here in the US. And so a couple of years ago, they put a bunch of nutraceuticals together, vitamins. Yeah, it's called the A-Red, if you know about it. Yeah.
And there's quite a few on the market for eye health to help slow down macular degeneration.
Yeah, and they actually had a clinical study that was done that showed with this collection, I think there's about 8 different nutraceuticals in that complex. They actually showed that it could slow down the progression a little bit. So in Russia, though, in Russia, they just routinely, I don't want to say cure, but they dramatically improve, and they stop the progression and they reverse the progression. So here with macular degeneration, you see on the left, Over here, their central vision goes first. And so you see the black and a little bit of the red and the yellow.
Yes.
And these people are the ones you see kind of walking around with their heads turned to the side, kind of, looking through their peripheral vision in order to see things. Over here on the right, I would say there's probably, I would call it a 60 to 70% reduction in maybe 80% in the black and the yellow.
Yes.
Okay.
Significant.
Yeah, certainly. This is glaucoma, same thing. You can't see this one quite as well, but you see a lot of black on the left and you see a lot of green on the right, or a lot more green than on the left. So the point of this is that these peptides are powerful. We're going to see them in some other situations. But if they can change, if they can stop the progression of retinal diseases that in most of the world, nothing can be done for these people, that's how powerful these peptides are. So what this is they wanted to see if how protective the peptides would be. So what we do, what's called induced cancer in animals, in rats and mice and so forth. And they induced it either chemically, that's the DMSBA up here. It's a complex of things, of chemicals. And they also used X-ray radiation. They used constant lighting and so forth. So what we're showing here is in the control group here, again, this was tumor incidence. What percentage of these little critters could they induce a tumor in? Okay, and so if we look at these little rats over here with the chemical complex, they were able to induce 81% of those little rats ended up with a tumor. The rats that were given peptides before and during, this process of inducement, that was what I think it's 36. Let me see. Looks like it's 26. Okay, 26%.
Yeah.
So it dropped the successful incidence of cancer inducement from 81 to 26%. And if you just sort of scan all the way down, you can see that there's a significant decrease in the vulnerability of these little animals if they were on a peptide beforehand. So here we have X-ray radiation, also of the little rats. 16% came down with cancer tumor, 3% over in the peptide group.
Yes, that's amazing. And this is using the pineal and thymus?
They used
Epithalamin, yes.
Well, they use the pineal epithalamin. They use the thymus, which in the natural form is called Volonix, and they use the vision peptides, the Visolutin.
Right, right.
So I had this in there for the doctors because with the COVID situation, I couldn't bring. Well, let me back up. Only doctors are admitted to the clinical studies, and now doctors are about half of all the people in the clinical study. 4 years ago, when I was starting out, the requirements to join the clinical study were you had to have a pulse.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, so here's the situation. Okay, you go to you're looking for people to bring into the clinical study.
Yes.
Okay? And so I would go to people I knew for a long time, because if you can imagine, I come to you and I say, I've got these pills or these capsules that were developed by the Soviet Union military in the Cold War against the US, and I think they can do some pretty good things. Would you be willing to swallow these for the next few years and we'll see what happens?
Well, I guess if you know a little about them, then you go, yeah, sure. But
well, I mean, truly, Sandy, it was real trust of all these people in the beginning, and
at the beginning.
Yeah, pretty much all of them were dear friends of mine and family members and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I put this up here because the physicians, if they're in the clinical study, they do use these peptides for their patients as well. And since they're food supplements, they don't have a problem with the FDA. We couldn't get in enough of the lung or respiratory peptides during this year because of the COVID situation. They use them very, very successfully to regenerate the respiratory system of COVID patients.
Interesting.
Okay, let's get to telomeres now. So there's little end caps that I told you about on those chromosomes, okay? We're not going to go through all this stuff. This is wonderful ability to look at the telomeres. The telomeres are the little light spots on the end. Let's go through this. These are just some American scientists who are good people. I know them all and so forth, and they're sort of defining here. Every time our cells divide, this is Bill Andrews, one of the real experts here in America. The telomeres get a little shorter, and every time they shorten, our cells age. This is all about cellular aging. One of the key things that we know now is that the health of a human is dependent on the health of their cells.
I would say that I've had many interviews over the last little while that actually relates back into the health of the cells for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to go do some graphs, so we'll skip that. This is Elizabeth Blackburn. She received the Nobel with Carol Greider and a fellow from Stanford in 2009 for their discovery in tetrahymena, which is basically pond scum, of the enzyme that allows the, we call it the telomerase enzyme, that allows the telomeres to be turned back on or activated. Anyway, what she's saying here is that telomeres slow the rate, telomerase, I'm sorry, the enzyme at which telomeres degrade and so forth. And people with longer telomeres have less risk of developing the common illnesses of aging. And there's hundreds and hundreds of clinical studies that support this. If you have short telomeres, you have more vulnerability to everything, and you have a shorter lifespan potential. So this is the study that was in Russian, translated, that took me to Russia, 2003. When I saw this, because up to this point, you know, the holy grail in telomere science was, is there anything that you can do to slow the loss of telomeres? Yeah, there's some things. Cut out the stress and a few things. Is there anything that you can do to grow them? No, there isn't. Okay, but when I saw this, I thought, what they're talking about is they're inducing telomerase activity, and the words telomere elongation. I mean, I just was shocked that the Russians had figured out how to basically how to lengthen telomeres, because if you can lengthen telomeres, you get more cell replication. So, this is Michael Fossil, really a great fellow. He's a US here, scientist and so forth. He claims that it's the single most promising approach to reversing the effects of aging. Michael is brilliant, and I disagree with him. And he and I talk about this, and we exchange emails and so forth. It's an important aspect of aging, but it is not the most promising as far as I'm concerned. None of these are the most promising. It's a basket of things that you have to do, because as I'll show in a few moments, telomeres are very different than organ regeneration. Okay, but he's a great guy. He's attempting to get a synthetic telomerase activator through the FDA trials and so forth, and he very well may, because he's a smart guy and a fine man. So back to Bill Andrews, he says it's the clock. The telomere is the clock of aging, and learning how to wind that clock backwards lays the cure for human aging. And with the greatest amount of respect for Bill Andrews, I disagree with him. It is an important intervention, but it is not the sole, as he's talking about it, where he talks about it as the clock and learning how to wind it backwards. What I say is, if we can lengthen telomeres, you're going to have the potential and probability of living longer and with less disease. The clock is actually coming up later in the methylation study. So we know from thousands of published studies that short telomeres are associated and play a role in the development of every age-related disease, at least the major ones that you can imagine: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and so forth. The major diseases, clear association. This is interesting. This is one of many studies with twins down here on the bottom. The twin that had the shortest telomeres had a 300% or 3 times greater risk of death than the co-twin with the longer telomeres. Okay, so now we're at the telomere activation protocol. This is the clinical study that I administer. in conjunction with Professor Cavinson. So what we were doing is, I said earlier, the aglet on the tennis shoe and so forth. You can think of, in a simple kind of a metaphor here, is that telomeres are like a worn tire. You travel on the tires and a little bit wears off every time the tire goes around and around and around, and eventually at 50,000 miles or 30 or 70 or whatever, you get down to where you're looking at telomeres that are like an old tire. So what we're doing, and have done it successfully, you're going to see in a moment, is we are doing this. We're creating a new tire. And here comes the proof.
All right, perfect.
So our clinical study, we were looking at chronological age, what we call reported telomere age. In other words, the equivalency of your telomere length compared to other people, and both in terms of an actual number as well as a percentile. And I'll be showing you those lab results. As an attorney, all this before here is sort of theory, okay?
Yes.
You have to have theory in order to finally get to results. But as an attorney and a scientist, it's like, I think there was that movie here in America with Tom Cruise, where he was a sports agent and he was running around all the time yelling, "Show me the money."
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is going to be show you the data. Okay.
Okay.
So we had 37 subjects in the initial, this is 2 years ago, in the initial group that had gone through and had been on the program for 2 years or more. And we used various dosage because we wanted to find out, what does it take to lengthen these telomeres? A low dosage, a medium, a high, and so forth. And these are just a few of the peptides that we use. As I said earlier, there's 23 of them now, because the Russians started off with the thymus peptide back in the 70s in the military, added the pineal gland peptide, and then over the years have added all of these others. So we have 23 to work with now, which is fascinating, and I'll come back to that. This is just a data spreadsheet. Basically what we're showing, and I know you can't see too much detail, but what we're showing is that this is the baseline for these people. And there's pages of this. I think there's, I don't know what, 20, maybe 20 or so. There's a couple of pages of this where we are looking at their chronological age. We did a baseline telomere test with SpectraCell Labs primarily, where we got measurements of how long their telomeres are. And what their percentile was compared to their same age peers. Then 2 years later, these are the results. We call this baseline. These are the 2-year results. And I know you can't see all the detail. Let me see if I can move. Let's see if I can move.
And what about lifestyle, Bill? Like, is there anything in here about their actual lifestyle? Like, smokers, non-smokers, exercise, overweight, none of that is factored in. It's just like everybody who goes into the study takes the same amount of peptides, correct?
No,
and it's measured before.
Yeah.
Your telomeres are measured and then measured after.
Yes, after a 2-year period of time. And I know it probably doesn't show up so well, but if you look at this last green column here.
Yeah.
Okay. And it'll show up in a bar chart in a moment. Okay. This is the increase in telomere length as reflected by what we call telomere age. In other words, we took their baseline telomere age equivalency, okay, and I'll show you this in the data in a moment. Okay. And this is the difference. And so what we have is a huge spread. We have some people that gain up. I was pressing too hard here.
Okay.
There we go. We have people that only gain 1 year over 2 years, okay? We have people, on the other hand, that gained 15, 18, 32, one person. A huge, huge spread. And I have some theories and some understanding and insight as to why that is.
Okay.
But the point is that,
sorry, Bill, is that where maybe that lifestyle factor might come into play?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly, Sandy, you've got it. Nobody lost telomeres, which is over a 2-year period, remarkable by itself, because every time our cells replicate, we lose a little bit of that end cap.
Right.
And over 2 years, these people didn't lose any telomere length. A few of them only gained one. The bar chart will show it, I think, a little more. As you can see, it's a huge spread in terms of results. Some people only got a little bit, a year or two. Other people got like 30 years reduction in, or lengthening of their telomeres, or in reduction of their telomere age. And I'm going to show you the actual lab data now. So this is me. You always have good scientists experiments on themselves first, okay?
Yes, I agree.
And if they survive that, then they can expand it.
Well, you know, same goes for a nutritionist. I think I've tried every single diet under the sun. So
Yeah. Well, fortunately, in nutrition and with telomeres, it's not lethal. So
right, exactly.
okay, so here I am at age 66. Before I knew anything about telomeres, or I should say about the Russians and so forth, I knew about telomeres. That's why I was testing myself here. So at age 66, my first telomere test in 2012, it came back, much to my dismay, that I had a telomere age of 72. And I was in the 47th percentile. So we would call this, you know, I'm 6 years older telomere wise. I'm aging. I have accelerated aging at this point. Given my family history, it's not surprising, because telomeres, you know, the cells that we're talking about, they function in the heart, they function in the liver, they function in the brain, in the pancreas, in the kidney, every place. And so what's happening is that my chromosomes are becoming less protected, because the telomeres are basically, instead of being that of a 66-year-old, I have the telomeres of a 72-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah. So then we move forward. 2 years later, June of 14, I'm still not using any peptides, because I don't know about these peptides at this point. And my chronological age is 68. My telomere age has accelerated even more. Okay, so I'm now more quickly, or more acceleration, losing those end caps. Okay, so I'm now 75 telomere wise. Okay, now I find the Russians, and they let me in the door. And so I retest, and I am 70. So I started with the peptides October of 2015. Wow, we're coming into 6 years now. Amazing. And I started using them in October. This test was done 8 months later, in June, it looks like, of 16. So I've been on the peptides 8 months. I'm now seeing a reversal. So I have gone from a 75-year-old telomere age down to 68, and I'm
Wow.
now telomere wise younger than my chronological age.
That's
All of
amazing.
that, yeah, all of that in 8 months. So.
Wow.
And I was taking gobs of peptides, because the nice thing about it is, because they're basically derived from food, from calves, there's no adverse, there's no risk, no danger. Except my significant other, Vess, says to me, my 15 minutes of fame is going to be on CNN, that this health nut choked on his vitamins one day and died.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Anyway, so I kept on. Okay, so 2 years later, I'm doing my peptides and so forth, and I've got these clinical studies now have started and so forth. So we've got lots of people involved. And at 72, I have the telomere age of a 44-year-old at this point.
Wow.
And I moved up, I think originally I was in the 47th percentile. I'm now in the 82nd percentile. Okay. And I test every 2 years now. And so at this point, I am 73. I'll be testing here in a few more months. My telomere age is that of a 35-year-old.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And I'm in the 88th percentile. Now, it isn't just me. Okay, here we go. So this is my significant other, Vess. This was her baseline. Now, she's really one healthy woman. You'll see a picture of her in a little bit.
Okay.
really healthy. And yet at her baseline, she's 64, she'll be 65 this month. She was 60 baseline. She also was experiencing accelerated telomere loss, and I know precisely why. But she's 3 years older, and you know as well, Sandy, why, I think.
Stress?
So this was her baseline. She was in the 49th percentile. I'll skip the interim ones because we were testing her like frequently. And in what, 2 years later, at age 62, she has the telomeres of a 33-year-old.
Oh my gosh, in just 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, she also changed a lifestyle kind of thing, and that we'll talk about in a moment.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And that lifestyle, it's stress, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Huge, huge. The single most damaging thing, or to create accelerated telomere loss, is stress. Such that Elizabeth Blackburn, the Nobel Prize laureate, she and some associates at UC San Francisco did a whole bunch of studies on stress and how they relate to telomeres. And they have published these studies, and there's just a direct correlation. The more stress in life, the shorter your telomeres. And in fact, what is fascinating is that Dr. Blackburn discovered, they did several clinical studies of pregnant women. And they did use questionnaires, interviews, and so forth. And they were asking basically, what was your stress level during the pregnancy? Did you want to be pregnant?
Oh,
What was
interesting.
the relationship with the father, okay, your husband or whoever it might be? A good relationship, bad relationship? What was the financial situation for you? Did you have other physical issues and so forth during the pregnancy? Was there loss of loved ones? Did a parent die? Did you lose your job? You know, just everything that they could. And what they discovered, and this is truly mind-boggling, the newborns that came, the newborns of a high-stressed mother had significantly shorter telomeres at birth
Oh my
than
goodness.
the children that came from a non-stressed mother. Isn't that amazing?
That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow.
If it wasn't Elizabeth Blackburn's research in UC San Francisco, I would really question it. But yeah, that's what they found. That's how potent stress is.
Yeah, I believe it.
Okay, this is Bess at 64, I think, or late 63. She's as I say, an international ballroom dancer, incredibly fit. She hasn't had a gram of sugar in her body in 40 years.
Oh,
She's
she's
that
stunning.
healthy. Yeah, she is
Stunning.
stunning. Yeah, this is her professional dance partner. Okay, I have permission to use Tora's name. This is Tora Bright, who is an Olympic athlete, gold and silver medal winner. I think she's become even a little more infamous if you have followed her at all recently. Anyway, I won't go into that, but she's in the newspapers again. Anyway, wonderful human being. So she won the gold. She's from Australia. She won the gold and silver in snowboarding in 2014. Actually, those Olympics were the Russian Olympics in Sochi, Russia, where I actually just a few months ago presented the interim results. Anyway, what happened was that, as you would imagine, the Olympic doctors, do extensive testing on the athletes all the time, labs all the time, and so forth. In fact, Tora said to me at one point, she feels like for a pincushion. She says they do so much testing. Anyway, the doctor, to my surprise, did a telomere test on her. And her results came back, as you see here, at a chronological age of 32, her telomere age was that of a 56-year-old.
Wow.
This is what you call the picture of stress,
Oh,
because
yeah.
she started competing at age 6. And so her entire life basically had been under high stress competition, getting ready for competitions, recovering from injuries. So her doctors, the Olympic doctors, referred her to a doctor here in the US. The doctor in the US was aware of the clinical studies, got a hold of me, put Tora and I together, to deal with the baseline telomere problem, and the fact that Tora had 9 concussions during
Oh
the course of
gosh.
her career. And with multiple concussions, it's just really a difficult situation. So we put her on a concussion protocol as well as a telomere protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And this is her test result, Tora Bright. A year or so later, maybe 2 years, I can't see. Anyway, her telomeres are now from 56 are equivalent to a 31-year-old.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, she's very happy.
That
She
is
just,
incredible.
yeah, she just had a baby late last year,
Oh,
and she's
wow.
doing great. Yeah, wonderful woman. We met in Argentina, actually, was where we met a couple of times. Okay, so this is another person. Oh, yes. Okay, this is interesting. This baseline, this is a lady who was 69 years old. Her telomeres were equivalent to an 80-year-old. And I'll tell you a reason in a moment why it's in here. And we tested her, put her on the program a year later, 70 years old, and her telomeres were equivalent to a 63-year-old. The lesson here is, this is my ex-wife, Linda, a wonderful lady. We had the world's friendliest divorce with hugs and tears and so forth, and we've
I
been
was gonna
friends.
say, she
Yeah,
trusts you still. There you
yeah,
go.
yeah. And we've been friends ever, for 40 years. I'm actually headed to Las Vegas in a week or so to see my grandson and see Linda and all that kind of stuff. So
Amazing.
the benefit, there's great benefit in trying to have an amicable relationship with your exes. I mean, at one time you loved them and cared for them, and it makes me sad when I see people, split up and they're angry and bitter and so forth. Well, that fortunately never happened with us,
That's right.
to the benefit of our kids and so forth. The other benefit is that you can run scientific tests on them later.
Yeah. And you've reduced your stress, right?
Yeah, yes. Okay, so the conclusion of the first 2 years of the study was the average was a 12.32 year, call it biological age. I hate that term because it implies that you can measure something very specifically. Basically, what we're showing here is that we lengthen people's telomeres to the equivalent of 12.32 years over a period of 2 years. In other words, we restored their telomere length at the rate of about 6 years for every 12 months that they were in the program,
Wow.
which again creates a huge amount of cell replication. And if you remember those earlier slides where shorter telomeres were associated with less, with mortality risk, morbidity risk, diseases and so forth. If you're lengthening your telomeres, you're becoming younger telomere wise. And so that I consider that, and other scientists consider that, a reversal of, I hate that term biological age, but basically biological age.
It seems to be a big term nowadays.
Yeah,
So people
yeah.
understand what it means.
Yeah, and the problem with it is that biological age is made up with of at least probably 30, 40 different elements. And so how can you say that someone's biological age is X, but it's the term that's used, people understand it.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so what this shows real quick is that the normal process, we go through life, we have long telomeres here when we're born. Over a period of time, they shorten, the cells go into apoptosis at some point. But if you can intervene here with the telomerase enzyme, then you reverse that. And so from here and here, which are equal, you start adding telomeres to the end here, and you can get back to, as you see, baseline. Okay,
Yes, yes.
apoptosis. Okay, I put this in because it's cute. We want to be the guy on the left, obviously.
Yes.
Okay, long telomeres. Oh yeah, this is Vess and Dr. Cavinson. We were in his conference room there in St. Petersburg, and he was so happy with what we had done. The Russians are not focused on longevity interventions. They're primarily focused on treating different medical conditions, diseases, and so forth. It took me 2 years. I hate to use the word convince. You don't convince Cavinson of anything. You present him data, and
Yes,
then he makes a decision.
exactly.
But yeah, he's a very strong Russian, brilliant, probably the smartest human being I've ever encountered. So it took me 2 years to kind of share enough data that he finally said, yeah, okay, we can go ahead and do an American study. And I don't think even he, because they've never bothered, other than the initial studies back in the 90s, they never bothered to do much with the telomerase activation. That basically they discovered how to do it, and they said, okay, on to the next thing. It was sitting on the shelf, and I came along and looked at it sitting there dusty, you might say, and said, hey, can I dust this off and start doing something with it? So he was very pleased with the results with VES. What's cute is that box was sitting on the counter. On the desk, he just grabbed it and was holding it up like the proud father. What's funny about it is it's a box of milk chocolates that Vess would never, ever
She
eat.
doesn't eat anyway.
No. So I go back to this. For me, as I said earlier, there's telomeres, there's DNA methylation, which we'll talk about in another session, and there's organ regeneration. And it is the proof of organ regeneration is back to the slide that we looked at earlier for that 12-year period of time. When you can reduce the mortality risk by 50% over this 12 years, that's organ regeneration. That's cellular, tissue, and organ regeneration, okay? Just changing telomeres by itself is not going to be sufficient. That just simply means you've got more miles on the tire. You can travel further, but if the car is falling apart, the component parts, the engine and the transmission and so forth, if it's falling apart, you're not going to get that far. You've got to have the organ regeneration as well.
Right, right.
Okay, so this is similar to what I showed you earlier, Sandy, the typical expectation of current aging. As we get older, we finally get to a point where we start to become frail and fail. This is what Professor Cavinson and I think we can do.
Yes.
This paradigm here.
Yes.
Okay. And I think I have one more thing, and then that'll wrap it up for today. I know we're running a lot of time. This is the bridge. The bridge is a concept that longevity scientists share. This is Dr. Digen. What he's basically saying here is that if you have this bridge, and on the other side of the bridge is longevity, what you have to do is stay alive to take the benefit of technologies that are either available now or will be developed during the next 10 years. So stem cells, DNA repair. The DNA repair is basically what I'm doing in that other study. He's got down here telomeres as well. That's available now, at least in the clinical study. Cloning, et cetera, genetic modification. So if we can stay healthy, and that's the key, is we've got to stay healthy for this next 10 years to reap the benefit. It's expected that in 10 years that cancer will be just a chronic disease. It will not kill people anywhere near the numbers that it does today. The same with heart disease. Diabetes will be controllable, much more so than it is even today. But you've got to stay alive for the next 10 years. So you've got to do everything to support your health, to not damage your health, if you're going to expect to cross that bridge and be able to then look at an extended lifespan. And so this one is basically showing, let me back up. Is showing a lifespan of 120 years. I don't know about, for myself, 120, given my family genetics.
Yeah.
But I think as I say, I'm going to be 75 here. I think I can make it to 100 and basically be healthy. I have changed very, very little in the last 15 years, even before the peptides. I'm stronger today, healthier today than I was 10 years ago. So I think 100 is very, very reasonable for me. For you, Sandy, I think you're 15 years or so younger than I am. You could be looking at 120. And your listeners, the ones that are in their in their 30s and their 40s, if they clean up the diet or continue with a clean diet, and do all the things to support their health and cross the bridge, they could be looking at 120 to 130 lifespan. And when we talk about this, it isn't just the number of years, it's lifespan and health span. In other words, it's not spending the last 10 years in a nursing home. It's being healthy right up to the end. And with that, I said the doctors in the conference could go and have a cup of coffee. So I think I'm at the end at this point. So
All right.
questions that you may have.
Yes, of course. I'm going to have a few questions for you. I feel like what you're doing is really cutting edge because you're talking about diseases. So diabetes, cancer, all of these diseases can be looked at as diseases of aging, right? Can be, not all. Like cancer is not, but what does happen is things just start to break down midlife. So of course I'm going to say, because everyone's going to ask this, not everyone has access to telomerase testing and to the bioregulators and that sort of thing. So what, in your opinion, is something that someone could do right now that will help with their aging and slow things down?
Okay, good question. Foundational diet, period. I mean, that is the foundation.
That.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know that better than most, probably better than me even. You can't expect to use the American, what do they call it, the standard American diet, SAD. You can't expect to operate on that basis, put that kind of fuel in your body and expect to have a long drive. It just isn't going to happen. Unfortunately, the food industry, I think with originally back in the 50s, with good intentions, there was this real scare at that time about the exploding population and not having enough food to feed the global population. And so, smart scientists went to work to figure out how to increase crop yield and various things with pesticides and hybrids and all that kind of stuff. And oftentimes in these things in the world of science, you have these unforeseen consequences. Profit becomes a priority, all that. You know it better than I do. So diet, it's pretty simple, actually. There's always this debate between vegetarians and carnivores and so forth, but whatever you're going to eat, it's got to be clean. It's got to be organic. You can't eat any processed food. You can't eat any sugar, period. I mean, it's almost that simple. Okay. And low carbs is what my firm belief. So diet, that's the foundation. The other thing is we've seen is you've got to get the stress out of your life. Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Easily said, more difficult to do. For me, it's I love the work that I do, so I don't consider it stressful, though the hours, probably aren't the healthiest. But when I'm spending the weekend with Vess and I don't do any work, that balances it somewhat. Exercise, of course, is a given. I'm in the gym 3 days a week. I'm on a treadmill. I'm dancing 3 nights a week, so forth. A big key, I think, is also flexibility as we get older. And I didn't start this. I now do Pilates twice a week as well, and as well as yoga. I wish I'd started earlier because frailty is just a killer. You hear these people, falling off a chair or a small step stool or just falling off a curb and so forth. You also have to, I hope I don't get censored here, but you have to avoid conventional medicine. Unfortunately.
You don't get censored with me, by the way.
Okay, good.
Not with me.
Yeah, you can cut me out if it's going to create a
No,
problem. Okay.
no,
Yeah.
but
Unfortunately, and when I was practicing law, I was a tax estate plan attorney, and most of my clients were professional people, doctors, and they're wonderful people. But the system is so broken. There are many doctors who know it's broken, would like to do things for their patients, but it's not in the standard of care, and they stand the chance of being sued and so forth. We've seen an explosion in the alternative medical field in terms of whatever you want to call them. They need to settle on one term, and they're, the holistic, integrative, functional, but those
there's
doctors.
many terms.
Yeah.
Yes.
When I went to the first functional convention at A4M in Las Vegas, probably 15 years ago, there were 200 people that showed up not this last December because of COVID, but the December before. There were 5,000, and those are mostly doctors.
Yeah.
So anyway, you need to avoid the conventional guys. You need to at least get a second opinion from an alternative or a holistic provider, and then find one that can become your primary doctor. You have to, I think you have to avoid a lot of the media, particularly these days.
No kidding.
Yeah, when you and I, or particularly I, grew up with, with reasonably trusted media sources, that's not the case anymore. And if you listen to the media without getting into the details, it's just all about creating fear. And that has a real impact on us. So I think that people have to turn off the mass media, or at least minimize it. And this COVID thing has been a really good example of that. What else would I say? Find something, particularly for your work, that is a passion and not work. A lot of people go to work to earn a paycheck, and they just, spend years and years at that. Yeah, passion. Those are the lucky people, are those who have a passion for their work. And I guess the last thing I would say is be grateful.
I
I
like
mean, all of us have grievances, things that don't go well. Some of us spend years in therapy. That's actually how I got a master's. I spent years in therapy complaining about my parents, and then I decided to become the therapist because of my obsessive compulsive nature. It's like, just be grateful. My God, we were born, and we wake up in the morning, and we have the day, and we have hopefully 70, 80, 90 years of those days to live. And I mean, that's such a miracle for me. And so gratitude, just because I get to be here today. I guess those would be the things that come to mind.
That's amazing. I love everything that you said. And of course, just speaking with you, I can see that you have pure joy in your life. And you talk about your relationship with your partner, Vess. You talk about what you do together, and that's like pure joy. I feel like joy is something that we all need,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right?
Yes.
So I want to thank you sincerely. I loved this entire presentation. This is something that I have never done before in the sense of how it was presented, but I feel what you're doing is so important to everybody who's listening, because you can have an impact. You don't have to do all of these fantastic tests and everything, but you can have an impact on your health today. And I look at you, and you're obviously an example of this.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just want to wake up breathing tomorrow.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence, for your time today.